Welcome to episode number 79 of the Inside the FLX podcast presented by FingerLakes1.com. I'm your host, Josh Durso, and today we're talking to Assembly Minority Leader Brian Kolb. Is he considering a run for governor? It's the question that has been dominating upstate political scene over the last several weeks. We'll talk to him about that news, as well as some recent legislation that has roots right here in Geneva. Brian, thanks a lot for being here today.
My pleasure, Josh.
So, are you running for governor? That is the only thing when it comes to Leader Brian Kolb. Is he running for governor? Are you running for governor?
Well, I'm exploring the opportunity to run for governor, which I've been doing for the last couple months. I'm actually hoping to make a final decision in November. And certainly, it's really been a two-pronged approach. One, to see if there's enough political support among the state chairs and state committee people, and also trying to find out, is there a potential for financial backing to run a credible race? And it takes time and takes evaluation, but certainly at this point, Josh, the feedback has been extremely positive.
And I feel like I know why, but I want to ask, why do you think that is, especially from the perspective of you are seen as one of the biggest voices for the Finger Lakes that exists in New York State?
Well, ultimately, you're looking for a larger platform to look out for not just the Finger Lakes region, but all of Upstate. Upstate feels it's lost its voice in the state government. I'm the only legislative leader from Upstate who continues to put that battle forthcoming in Albany. But certainly, I think the background experience, both in the private and public sector, and certainly being a legislative leader for the last 8 years, has provided me what I think with a seat in the arena that's unique to most, and certainly now a platform, hopefully, to carry the torch and talk more importantly about how we can actually improve the lives of all New Yorkers, and of course being close to home, the Finger Lakes region.
Now, you are probably one of the more specific legislators in New York in terms of just how specific you are usually in terms of discussing issues like big sweeping changes to improve quality of life for the folks who live in places like rural communities. Talk to us a little bit about why you've made this effort to really push for sweeping changes across the state.
Well, certainly, the one question I ask people all the time, and especially in talking to a group of people like I'm doing now on a more regular basis, is I ask them, is New York State government working for you? And if so, please raise your hand. And I would say I've been asking that question for 6 or 7 years now, Josh, and ultimately I think over that time maybe 3 or 4 hands went up. And I think that's the ultimate question that I would ask anyone right now, is New York State government working for you? And if you can't say yes, especially after the millions, if not billions of dollars that have been spent of your money, taxpayer money, then I think we have to do something different than what we've had going on now for at least the last 7 years or longer.
Now, of course, the recent move to provide insurance to volunteer firefighters, that bill had local roots right here in Geneva. Talk to us a little bit about what it means to you to actually see that all the way through and now that be law, and how important that is for volunteer firefighters across the whole state.
Well, we do a lot of work for constituents throughout my district, and I have done so since when I first got elected. And that, to me, is the most meaningful part of the work we do as a legislator. But over 5 years ago, Matthew Foe and some of his other volunteer firefighters came to my office in Geneva and said, look, professional firefighters have cancer coverage, medical cancer coverage, and volunteer firefighters don't. My dad many years ago was a volunteer firefighter up in Monroe County, and I've never forgotten that. And certainly a number of volunteer firefighters, I grew up in Honeoye, and they depended upon the volunteer fire department and the volunteer ambulance crew to service that community, and it's all dedicated community time. And so when Matthew told his story, certainly that provided the motivation to see what we could do to inspire potential legislation in the state legislature. And Senator Mike Nozzolio introduced the bill in the state Senate originally, and of course I did in the state assembly, and it was passing in the state Senate, but it was sort of stalled in the state assembly. So what happened, though, where the Firefighters Association came to me and said, Brian, would you be willing to give up your bill, your idea, to an Assembly Democrat to see if we can help make this move more quickly and try to get this done? And my reaction is, of course, it's more important about getting it done than it is taking credit. Yeah. Now I got to be a sponsor of the bill, but certainly the way Albany works, especially in the state assembly, Assembly Democrats don't want Assembly Republicans getting credit for good ideas. It's just the way the place works, unfortunately. And certainly that's one of the things we continue to try to change. But certainly I gave that bill up to an Assembly Democrat. I co-sponsored it. And, of course, it finally passed in the Assembly because really it's a common sense bill. Yep. And then Governor Cuomo signed the bill last Sunday, and which I was very happy to see. We weren't sure whether he was or whether he was not going to, but he did. And, of course, in Matthew Foe's memory, now many volunteer firefighters, men and women that serve our communities across the state, at least will have some coverage if, God forbid, anything were to happen to them in the line of duty.
Mm-hmm. Now, you pointed out something really interesting, I thought, the topic as a whole, in a recent column. Job stagnation, the growth or the lack thereof. What do you see as the role of state government in pushing for better initiatives to get business here in not just New York State, but also these more rural areas like the Finger Lakes?
Well, I think first and foremost, state governments has to get out of the way. And, even local governments sometimes get in the way of business expansion. If you will, the pining of lots of local planning and zoning regulations and the time it takes to get through approvals. I mean, it gets to be a very lengthy and costly process. And what does that mean? That means businesses are deterred from wanting to open or grow a business here. And it's not just local regulations. It's, state regulatory environment, the tax, fine, and harass by state agencies to businesses. And it's not just the small businesses or medium or large size. It's also not-for-profits, hospitals, nursing homes that are inundated with the Department of Health coming in for inspections, disrupt the workplace. You don't have the form in the right place or dotted in the right place, and then you get fined. It's a very, very bad, toxic atmosphere. And so what I've always said is, state government should be there to kind of keep an eye open for real abuses or real problems.
Right.
But other than that, get out of the way. And certainly also provide a cost environment, which means lower property taxes, hopefully lower income taxes, certainly lower energy costs. All of those things add up when businesses are trying to evaluate whether to move here or stay here. In fact, just recently, the Tax Foundation came out and ranked New York State 49th out of 50 in terms of the worst business tax climate in the country. So, and that's a nonpartisan publication that is saying these things. Mm-hmm. And so those are the sort of things that we have to not only pay attention to, but take action to correct.
Now, does it just mean the growth that has happened or the success that like the wine industry, the craft brew industries have seen here in the Finger Lakes, that growth is just sort of even more incredible? It's almost like the region is successful despite itself, despite the state's efforts to kind of continue clamping down.
Well, one of the things I think that in our region, and I can talk to this specifically, in the Finger Lakes region and the greater Rochester area, you have a very, very strong entrepreneur spirit. If you just look at what's happened in the greater Rochester region, which includes, Seneca County, Ontario County, Wayne County, Orleans County, Livingston County, Yates County, that greater metropolitan area, Kodak used to be the major employer. Well, Kodak is a shadow of itself. Bausch & Lomb, Xerox. And what's happened is that the region, based on its entrepreneurial spirit, has said, well, what other things can we do? Because we still would like to stay here because this is a great region to raise your family, if you're having kids or grandkids. But the toughest part is people keep bumping their heads into is that the cost to live here in the state, mm-hmm. property taxes jumps right up at the top of the list, mm-hmm. Especially if you own property on one of the lakes. So these are sort of the barriers that we have to continually fight through and look at. But I've traveled the world in my private sector experiences. You won't find a better place to live in the Finger Lakes. Mm-hmm. And we have other great places in New York State. But what happens is, forget the weather. It's just that, especially for young people, is there a good paying job in my future? Can I afford to buy a house here? What kind of costs am I going to incur to send my kids to school or to college? So these are the pocketbook issues. How much taxes am I going to pay on gasoline or sales tax on goods and services? These are all the things that matter to people. And it transcends political stripes, whether you're Democrat, Republican, conservative, blank, independents. It's just a matter of, hey, it's my pocketbook. What can I afford? What can my family afford? Mm-hmm. And I think that's sometimes is missed when we're talking about public policy.
Now, what do you say to the folks who get a little bit frustrated, or probably a lot of bit frustrated, with the sort of methodology of an IDA handing out a tax break to a business to lure them to the area, where you're basically saying New York State should get out of the way, stop being a roadblock. What do you say to those folks who see this happening over and over again, and they feel it impacts their pocketbook because it's their money, it's their tax dollars that are being spent that way?
Well, certainly I think what's happened is that, and it's a competitive environment. So why does New York State have to come up with a lot of incentives, whether it's through appropriate financing through local IDAs, whether it's pilot programs, whether it's, again, tax exemptions, or even investment of state taxpayer funds, low-cost loans? It's because New York State's cost environment is not competitive with other states. Yeah. And also, what's changed really over the last 30 years is we've become a global economy in the world. There's, the language barriers now and distance barriers are overcome with technology. You can FaceTime with someone in India or Japan or China. And certainly the more that we've become multilingual in our populations, same thing with populations overseas. They've become more attuned to the United States speaking English language and customs. So the world, even though the same size, has shrunk in its connectivity. Mm-hmm. And certainly the internet these are all things that didn't exist when I was your age. So these are cultural changes, mm-hmm. Global changes, and so New York has not, I think, adapted to the competitive sense where you have to come up with these incentive programs to be competitive with other states. For instance, the state of Florida has no state income tax, none. Their property taxes are significantly lower. Now, I will argue that our schools in New York State and our higher ed institutions are of much higher quality. Mm-hmm. But certainly, when you talk to people and say, hey, I can go work in Florida and not pay any income tax, just like Tom Golisano did, mm-hmm. To the tune of $13,000 a day, that's just crazy numbers.
Now, to that point, I think this kind of goes into the whole, the region is losing its young people. It's say 25 to ballpark 40, 45. What do you think really has to happen to stop the bleeding in that area? Because it seems that every rural community in the Finger Lakes and in upstate New York as a whole is losing that core group, and that seems to be what's necessary to make that next leap.
Well, I think first and foremost, we have to do more in-depth research and study with young people. We need to ask them. We need to tune in to the millennials as to what their needs in terms of what economic opportunities they're looking for. Mm-hmm. It's a changing economy. Is it all technology? Is it health? Certainly, is it research? There's a multitude of career options that exist in the world, but there are more career options, let's say, and whether it's even New York City versus, upstate New York, I think we have to do more homework and more outreach to mm-hmm. try to answer that, because I don't think there's a clear-cut, this is the 3 steps you have to do. Mm-hmm. But I do know that you have to have job opportunities. And I think there are more job opportunities as well for non-college attendees And I think we're missing the boat on that from a standpoint of, I think there's so much of a push in our education system and guidance counselors in our schools. Their metric is how many of our students are graduating from high school and going to college. And they use that as to say, see what kind of a great school system we have. But they're also losing an opportunity to reach out to young people that may be interested in a skilled trade or promote a skilled trade, and there's not a step backward. There's no baggage with going into a skilled trade. In fact, skilled trades pay very well. But I don't think there's enough emphasis on the technical side that of job opportunities, employment opportunities that exist.
Now, switching gears a little bit, I want to get your opinion on a couple new state initiatives that have taken shape over the last year or two. First, the Shared Services Initiative. Hit, miss, somewhere in the middle. Does it have good roots but needs some tweaking? How do you land on that as we go through the first full year of execution with it?
Well, first of all, shared service is a great idea. And you talk to municipalities, especially around here, they've been doing it.
Yeah.
But to be told you must do this is a whole different approach. And that's the problem with Albany. That's the problem with Washington. Don't tell us what to do or how to do it, because part of the reason it's expensive to live here is because of you telling us things we have to do and telling us we have to pay for them. And I think that's where there's not enough creativity and thinking out of the box about some of these approaches. And so I think you can create incentives to say, hey, can you do more? We could provide another cost, maybe a savings to you as well. But it can't be something where you're just trying to jam it down the throats, and especially say, or else. Right. And that or else is a total disincentive for people that are have the opportunity to make those things happen.
And did it seem rushed? Because it didn't really seem like local municipalities, speaking for Seneca County, watching them move through the process, it didn't really seem like they felt like they had enough time to do the necessary research that you're talking about to effectively plan for this, which it's huge. When you're talking about sharing services, there's a lot of work that has to go into that. Do you think it was rushed, or do you think there was an adequate amount of time for municipalities to get it together?
Well, my personal opinion, yes. It's always a good goal to say, look, what can we do to save local taxpayers money? Mm-hmm. And how can we help each other in different communities, whether it's sharing a road grader or, a culvert repair, where some towns have more equipment than others, and you share those things and you help each other out. And then you're always dealing with the other barrier, which is what will the state comptroller's office say when they come in to audit your books,
right? And
say, well, wait a minute, you're not supposed to use Waterloo's resources to help out Seneca Falls. Mm-hmm. These are some of the crazy things that go on, and all I'm saying is come up with plans. Work with the municipalities to say, what do you think would be the best approach? Mm-hmm. And what do you think would be the best time frame? And, use a little bit of sugar versus vinegar to make some of these happen, and establish collaboration and cooperation versus telling people what they have to do.
Now, the Excelsior Scholarship. I feel like everyone can say that it's a nice feel-good measure. But is it cost effective? Is it a good idea when you throw it out there and start doing it and the dollars and cents start to come in? How do you feel about it now that we're one semester into the execution? And do you think it was a good idea to move forward the way they did, the way the state did?
Well, let's start out from the very beginning. The Excelsior Scholarship has also been tagged free tuition. And let me remind everyone, there's nothing in life that's free. Someone's paying the tab. And also, when they started this program, the governor did this more for political optics, sitting next to Bernie Sanders, who championed free tuition, college tuition in the presidential campaign. And so what I would call the heart wasn't in the right place in terms of this particular program. This is more about politics. The Assembly Republican Conference, actually before the governor came out with the final outline of his plan, we had presented a plan that used the existing tuition assistance program, otherwise known as TAP, to increase TAP awards, also increase the eligibility on income for students in both public and private schools, also reestablishing help for graduate students, which was taken away back in 2008 and 2009, and then also providing a little tax relief for those within a certain income range that have a lot of college debt and interest. So it was the most comprehensive program, and don't take it from me. You talk to all the public colleges and private colleges and universities that want to go on record without fear of retribution from the governor, will tell you our program was the best. And it is the best. So now what happens? So now they come up with this free tuition, which isn't free. It's going to cost, I don't know, over $100 million. And we don't not even sure the metrics yet, how it's going to work. They don't even have a feel on the real numbers and who's really eligible or not.
That was one of the big questions that I wanted to ask you is, will hard data ever be released, or will we see it soon, like before the end of the first full year of activity? Will that data come out, do you feel?
I think some data will come out. I'm actually asking of it, for instance, locally with Finger Lakes Community College to share the data. Right. Now, I'm not looking for bad news, but I think we really need to know, is it really working? But now in the SUNY system, the public school system, which gets the major benefit here versus private colleges and universities, they've just gone and raised their tuition to all the other students by $200. So now those students are picking up the tab to help the increased costs. And so that's why I'm saying it's more expensive. It doesn't hit as many students as our plan does. It was done for political purposes. And to me, that never is a tenet of good public policy.
Now, if we're talking about resources, young people are obviously a big resource. Another huge resource for us here in the Finger Lakes are the lakes. Protecting the lakes has kind of been one of those long-standing, constantly discussed issues. Do you think the state is doing enough at this point to ensure that the health of all of the Finger Lakes continues to be protected?
I think overall it would be fair to say that the state, especially D.C., as an agency, are they concerned about the water quality and maintaining water quality in the Finger Lakes region? The answer would be yes. I think they're concerned. Is there enough being done? It's hard for me to gauge that right now. It's like we are reactive when we discover an algae bloom in a given lake, and it doesn't matter what lake. When it appears, everybody kind of scrambles, and it's hard to really determine if we have a concentrated, focused effort on the health of the Finger Lakes. Now, I think everybody cares about it, but what I don't know is what the coordinated effort is of the state D.C. Are they staffed properly? Is there adequate resources? There are certainly a lot of watershed groups that are very concerned about water quality and protecting our lakes, and those are all volunteer efforts. My hats are off to all of them. And actually, I would probably say I'd actually like to hear from them if we could do more. And is it just awareness? Is it education? Is it spending money? I don't know what it is, all three.
Right.
But I think that's where you want to. I think in general, people want to feel that there's somebody watching the store on the lakes.
Yeah.
And I think there are a lot of people watching the store kind of individually. I'm not sure how collective the effort is, at least at this point.
Now, I want to get your opinion on a couple propositions that are on the statewide ballot coming up. Obviously, Constitutional Convention, and then also one that I think you've been pretty boisterous about, making a little bit of an effort to end pensions for those who have been found corrupt, literally. So your feeling on those two measures, and is it just happenstance that the two are on the ballot the same year? Because what we found locally is that some people are a little bit confused about which is which and what is doing what. And is that intentional? Was that just a mistake that happened to come through, or where do you come down on that? One
would be a little cynical. First of all, for whoever is viewing or listening, there are actually three propositions on the reverse side of the ballot. One deals with the Constitutional Convention, whether they have it or not. It's either yes or no. 2, it's establishing a land bank up in the Adirondack area. That's a very good amendment, easy to say yes to. There's no controversy, no partisanship. It's a great amendment. And also the third one is pension forfeiture, which is taking pensions away from elected officials that have been convicted of crime. Mm-hmm. Again, another great amendment. I think the public should support it. And that actually was created back in 2010, the idea, by Assembly Republicans. And if they had moved back then, Sheldon Silver and others convicted of crimes wouldn't be getting their state pensions, which they are now. Mm-hmm. So at least it got done, or hopefully it will get done, in terms of putting it in the Constitution. On the con, that's controversial, but I'm going to try to capsulize this briefly.
Yep.
I'm for it, but it's because I'm trying to find any mechanism possible to reform Albany.
Right.
Things that Albany won't do because they want to keep the status quo. Mm-hmm. And that is term limits, borrowing taxpayer dollars without voter approval, redistricting, which mm-hmm. draws all the legislative districts. Those are the types of things that I think the Constitutional Convention, if the convention happens, could take up. Mm-hmm. Now, I can tell you that there's an enormous amount of opposition, mm-hmm. but it's out of fear. And fear is something bad's going to happen for things I care about. So as an example, all public employees, teachers, municipal workers, police officers, firefighters that are on the public pension system have been told, if a constitutional convention happens, you could lose your pension. It's absolutely not true.
Yep.
But they're telling their members that anyways. Mm-hmm. Gun rights people. I'm a gun owner. Gun owners are being told, we could have another SAFE Act, only worse.
Right.
For open space preservation people, they're being told, you could lose our open space protections. So any status quo group is coming up with the single reason to their following, mm-hmm. out of fear, to say no. So my view is, I have no skin in the game. Mm-hmm. I just are looking for opportunities to reform Albany. If the voters decide no, then they decide no. Right. But all I try to do is, when I talk to people about the Constitutional Convention, is educate them about what I know about it, mm-hmm. what I think it is about, and what it could be. But ultimately, usually fear wins over hope. And that's really what you're talking about here.
And the emphasis seems to be on the point that, it's a really lengthy process. It doesn't mean that the Constitution is changed just because of a yes vote now. But also there's a delegate selection process, and it's a very lengthy move. Realistically, how long would something like this actually take to play out, even if it were a yes vote in November? Yeah,
it's actually pretty simple. And the voters get to decide all three steps. One, this November, Election Day, yes or no to the convention. I'm just going to say if it happens yes, I'll keep going. Right. So that happens in November. Next year, there's an election process for delegates to serve at the convention. So that's 2018. Mm-hmm. And those are things that the voters choose, the delegates that they want to represent them at the convention.
Yep.
So 2018. 2019 is when the convention is held. Mm-hmm. And then whenever the delegates get together, have the convention, decide whatever they're going to propose to the voter, it comes back to the voters, and the voters get to decide whether they like the idea or not. So it's really a 3-year process from now. Mm-hmm. And it's deliberate, it's not rushed, and the voters get 3 swings at the bat, to borrow the baseball term.
Yep.
And the other thing is, I've also introduced legislation, because people would say, well, the same cast of characters are going to run the convention that are in the legislature and in Albany. I've actually proposed legislation to prevent that. Mm-hmm. You can't prevent someone constitutionally from running for an office, but you can prevent them from holding 2 offices. So my legislation says any elected official, state assembly, state senate, Congress, town supervisor, whatever, if you're holding that office, that's fine. But if you want to be a delegate, you got to give that up to be a delegate.
Okay.
And trust me, that will eliminate 99% of the people that would try to give up their conceivably their day job for a part-time convention that's only going to last probably 6 months.
Right. Now, last topic before we get you out of here. Obviously, really appreciate you coming in, but the Comptroller's Bridge Report essentially said that local bridges are failing. But my question to you is, how can local municipalities be expected to fix these bridges when New York State is quite literally draining them financially? Obviously, they're important because these bridges are failing. Seneca County, Cayuga County had among the worst in the state. Talk to us a little bit about what that report meant to you and what you hope to see moving forward.
Well, I think first and foremost, the report just illustrates what I think factually, that we've got a lot of investment to do in local infrastructure in terms of roads and bridges. And certainly it also outlines it's going to be a very costly endeavor to fix all of those things that need to be fixed. New York is an old state. We have winters to contend with and salt that erode bridges and roads, et cetera. But when you talk to some of the, a lot of the highway superintendents and county superintendents, they'll tell you that, there used to be money diverted from the federal highway program to the localities for local bridge and road repair. Mm-hmm. And what's happening is that money is being taken over by New York State, and then they trickle out things through the CHIPS program, Consolidated Highway Improvements. But they're, if you will, the localities are kind of getting bumped aside based on what the state wants to do with the money first. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things that I think has to change with the current administration. As with most issues that we're facing in the state, you got to work with people, you got to collaborate, you got to listen to what I'll call local experts, see what we can do to help. And you could really, Josh, take that approach on almost any problem that we face in New York. Anything that's been humanly made is humanly fixable. And it's just a willingness to want to work together, throw party affiliations out the window. Once you're in office, I've done this my entire life, work with Democrats, work with Republicans. Once you're in office, try to find compromise, try to understand and listen to each other. And that's an approach that the current administration hasn't done very well.
Well, I really appreciate you coming in today to talk to us and to sort of update us on things. And I'm sure we'll be having you back as you move forward in this really interesting process of exploring a run for governor.
Well, thank you, and it's been great to be on.
Thank you, and that's going to do it for us today. I'd like to thank Leader Kolb, our listeners, and FingerLakes1.com for making this podcast possible. Inside the FLX airs Sundays at 7 p.m. on Spectrum Channel 12 and is available on iTunes, Stitcher, and the FingerLakes1.com app. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.